And then sunny spells for many on Wednesday, and more especially into Thursday, will lead to rising temperatures up to the mid to high 20s in places.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com. You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's 6 o'clock and I'm Michelle Dewberry. Coming up tonight, the National Risk Register highlights a whopping 89 threats to the UK and, of course, to us living here. Meanwhile, we've got over 22,000 soldiers who cannot even pass military fitness tests. So I'm asking, if push came to shove, do you think this country could actually defend itself? Not least, by the way, because we can't even seem to defend our channel border. Speaking of which, a leaked memo shows that, get this, this, the property that the government is trying to acquire for these migrants is now planned to last for at least 5 more years. So I'm asking, is this the new normal? And if so, how do you feel about this? And deeply distressing images of the latest victim of a dog attack, a little 5-year-old girl, circulating today, the same day that we've just heard a couple have escaped jail after their dog mauled their baby to death. Apparently, they've suffered enough. Who is to blame for this rise in dog attacks? Is it the dog or the owner? And if it's the latter, are we being harsh enough when it comes to punishment? And in today's episode of The World Has Gone Mad, NHS staff could find themselves potentially prosecuted if they use the wrong pronouns of a patient. Please stop the bus. I want to get off. But before I do, I'll be discussing those topics with Peter Hitchens and Alex Dean after the news with Polly Middlehurst.
Michelle, thank you. Good evening. The top story on GB News tonight. Police in Northern Ireland say they're confident that leaked data of officers and staff is in the hands of dissident Republicans. Earlier, Sinn Féin confirmed that a redacted version of the police data that had been posted on a wall facing its offices was described as sinister. Last week, the details of 10,000 police officers and staff were published online by mistake. Chief Constable Simon Byrne said police are now operating under the assumption that the data will be used to generate fear and uncertainty.
We are now confident that the workforce data set is in the hands of dissident Republicans, and it's therefore a planning assumption that they will use this list to generate fear and uncertainty, as well as intimidating or targeting officers and staff. I won't go into detail for operational reasons, but we are working round the clock to assess this risk and take measures to mitigate it.
Well, in other news today, bidders for the high street retailer Wilko have been given until Wednesday to put forward offers to buy the firm. The general goods chain fell into administration last week, putting the future of its 400 stores and around 12,000 jobs at risk. It's understood administrators from PwC have set the deadline to try to secure a deal in a bid to try to prevent redundancies. Shoppers in Nottingham said they're disappointed.
Very sad because Wilko has been around forever. It's the first place that you think of going to when you want to bargain.
Bit of a shock really, another shop to go when it's actually one that you can go where little bits, like if B&M haven't got it, Wilko's 9 times out of 10 got it.
It's unfortunate that a shop like this, which actually serves the community really well, the league's being taken out from underneath it.
I was very, very shocked, because it's in the right place for people to shop, and it has very good stuff. The staff are very friendly, and I think they've got a good range of stuff that they sell, and I'm just very sad that it's closing.
In London, 2 men have been stabbed in what police are treating as a homophobic attack outside a nightclub in the southwest of the city. They were targeted while standing outside the venue on Clapham High Street last night. Both were treated in hospital and then later discharged. Police are still searching for the suspect. Now, a mother and a father have been spared jail over the death of their 3-month-old daughter in Lincolnshire. Kyra King was attacked by the family's dog, a Siberian husky, in March last year. The animal, one of 19 kept by the couple, jumped out of their vehicle and left the baby with head and neck injuries. Her parents, Vince King and Karen Alcock, performed CPR on their daughter in an attempt to revive her. The judge described the case as tragic as he handed them suspended sentences. Now, the government's trying to clarify when officials were made aware of the Legionella concerns on board the Bibby Stockholm accommodation barge. That's after Dorset Council said Home Office contractors were told traces of the bacteria were detected on day 1 as the asylum seekers boarded. All 39 migrants have been removed from the vessel. Downing Street says it expects them to return as soon as possible. The government's set to announce new plans to ensure cancer is detected in people much earlier. Performance targets will be scrapped and replaced with a new faster diagnosis standard, which will see patients who've been urgently referred receiving a diagnosis within 28 days. Patients with cancer will then start treatment within 9 weeks from the date of the referral. The NHS believes the proposals will help save more lives, but Cancer Research UK says current missed targets represent years of underinvestment by the government. And that comes as junior doctors in England continue their 4-day strike. It's estimated 1 million procedures and appointments will be cancelled and rearranged due to the strike action. The walkout started on Friday and ends at 7 o'clock tomorrow morning. It's the 5th round of strikes by BMA members since March in their dispute over pay. And as you've been hearing, Network Rail has released a video of dangerous behaviour at railway level crossings. If you're watching on TV, take a look at this CCTV compilation showing a person doing press-ups on the railway, dog walkers sitting their pets on the tracks to pose for photographs, and children putting stones on the line. Nearly 50 cases of misuse have been reported by train drivers. All were caught on camera in Worcestershire and the West Midlands so far this year. Network Rail says it's trying to raise awareness and discourage people from risking their lives on the railway. You're with GB News across the UK, on your TV, in your car, on your digital radio and on your smart speaker now by saying play GB News. This is Britain's news channel.
Thanks for that, Polly. I'm Michelle Dewberry. I'm with you till 7 o'clock. My eyebrows were raised at that last story in the news headlines there. When it comes to people doing stupid things on train lines, the telephone, did you notice how many times the smartphone played a part in some of those antics? If you ask me, those smartphones have made so many people anything but smart. Anyway, people that are smart, I'm pleased to say, are joining me tonight. The columnist for the Mail on Sunday, Peter Hitchens, is alongside me, and the PR consultant, Alex Dean. Do you see what I did there?
I did. Not sure I deserved it, but I liked it.
Very smart. You know the drill, don't you, on this programme? It's not just about us three. It's very much about you guys at home as well. What's on your mind tonight? I've got a lot coming your way, whether it's the NHS and the pronoun usage there. Laughable if you ask me, but very serious nonetheless, because people can get into a little bit of trouble if they happen to get those pronouns wrong. I also want to talk to you about the 5-year plan when it comes to migrant accommodation. Did you realise it was going to be half a decade potentially that we're planning for? So is this the new normal? What do you think to that if it is? I've got all of that coming your way, plus dog attacks and a lot more. So should we get stuck in? The usual way is gbviews@gbnews.com is how you get a hold of me on the email or tweet me at gbnews. Now, 22,500 soldiers have apparently failed their fitness test. Army chiefs have said that this is a failure of leadership over the past 3 years. Now, the reason this caught my eye is because the National Risk Register has also recently been released as well. It says that there's 89 key threats to the UK's security and safety, and it's across a whole spectrum of different things, whether it's cyber attacks or whatever. But it got me thinking, Alex Dean, if threats do present themselves, which of course they will, that is an unfortunate part of life, do you think that the UK is fit, ready and able to defend ourselves?
I think we're a lot more fit and able than some would think, and I think just like we surprised the world in some ways when the Argentines, seeking to catch us at what they perceived as a very weak and decayed point in our national cycle, tried to seize the Falklands. On my mind, because Falklands Day was yesterday. And Britain certainly shocked the Argentines with our ability to defend them. And so the question that arises in my mind is, I don't know if this is the 90th risk on the risk register you were just talking about. Could we do that again? And to that end, I actually don't regard the news you've been highlighting of these soldiers failing their fitness tests. I don't regard that as a bad thing. I regard it as a good thing that we still have the standards and they're willing to talk about the fact people have failed them. Because if you've got something like this happening, at least you can hold people to standards and seek to get them fit again. Believe me, most of the time in the public sector, if you find people are failing standards, they change the standards, not the people. Here, God bless our army, they say we're going to get you fit.
I respect your ability to see the positives in that. I can tell you that. Peter, do you share the optimism?
No. It's several points. The Falklands, we very, very nearly lost. And it was only because the Conservative government at the time had failed to sell off and get rid of several important ships that the Navy were able to mount the rescue operation, the task force which took the Falklands back. It was a very close-run thing, and we very nearly lost it. And it's an illustration of the best-known fact: all military planners, all wars come out of the blue as a surprise, in a shape you weren't expecting. And to deal with that, you have to have properly trained, competent, reasonably sized armed forces with a very wide range of abilities. I don't think we have that. I think ever since the end of the Cold War, the governments of both parties have used the opportunity to cut back on military, naval and air force spending to the point where we now simply don't have adequate defences. Certainly in military terms, that 22,500 figure of those who didn't pass the fitness test, that's more than a quarter of the army that we have now. Our army is so tiny, it's smaller than the one which Hitler allowed Vichy France to maintain after they surrendered in 1940. It's that small. The Navy, which I feel very strongly about because my father was in it, is, again, a pitiful shadow of its former self. When I was a defence reporter in the 1980s, it was always stated that the Navy's surface fleet of destroyers and frigates would never fall below about 50. And now it's way below that, and quite a large number of those, I think, are probably tied up alongside, not really able to move. And there are major problems of retention in all the armed services of the crucial NCOs and experienced officers who keep armed forces together. I think we're neglecting it to the point where it is becoming a serious crisis. And it needs to be addressed, but it costs a lot of money to maintain up-to-date armed forces. And we have cut that in the 60s, 70s and 80s. It was still the case, I think, that we spent twice as much on defence as we did on education. Now it's the other way around. But are our schools particularly good? It doesn't seem to me.
No disagreement from me on headcount and no disagreement from me on spending. I think in the current environment, it's plain there are so many threats facing Britain and the wider West that we should be upping our spending on defence. But one of the things that does reassure me somewhat is
upping it in where? Which area would you increase your spending on? What, the boots on the ground, the military aircraft? Where would you spend that?
There's certainly, thank goodness these things aren't entirely up to me, but I certainly think that the military needs more resource, and two obvious things to me is upping the headcount in soldiers who operate at the pointy end. So I would have more infantrymen in our military.
But why though? Because the pushback to that would be, why do you need all these boots on the ground when you're a member of NATO?
Because we deploy our army all the time, and it's one of the few properly trained good ones. So that's part one. But part two is that I would spend a great deal more on what the Ukraine conflict has demonstrated to be so useful, which is drone technology, unmanned aerial vehicles and so forth. Because the ability to deliver ordnance very quickly without risk to even a single person on your side seems in the modern media age to be highly attractive to the person launching an offensive, but also highly effective on the other side. It's clear that Russia fears few things in the course of their conflict with Ukraine. They don't fear their own death count, but they do fear single raids by drones, and that has really put it up them in a way that other things haven't.
Do they fear that?
I wouldn't know. I'm not sure they're particularly... I don't think Russia worries very much about British armed forces, I have to say. It's not...
We've had to scramble 2 RAF jets. Is it today? Is that news today?
Well, you don't know. We always talk about this melodramatic scramble and intercept. What happens is some Russian planes fly some way past our airspace and we send up some aircraft to go and fly alongside them. It isn't actually the big drama that it's made out to be. But leave that aside. You mentioned NATO. One of the interesting things about the Falklands is because it was out of NATO area, NATO members did not have any desire or responsibility to help Britain against it. And it was quite a struggle to get the United States, which is very divided on the issue, to give us the support which most people expected them to give us at that time. You might well be on your own. It's an insurance policy. Most of the time when you spend money on insurance, it goes down the drain until you really need it, whereupon it hasn't gone down the drain. That's what defence spending is about. The army is absurdly small. It simply isn't an effective size anymore. International experts are beginning to say it no longer deserves to be called an army. We need to do something about that. And we spend, I think it's something in the region of $4.5 to $5 billion on the Ukrainian war in the past couple of years. Now, some of us would argue that this is a rather bizarre concern for Britain, which has no obvious interest in the Ukrainian war, but whether it is so or not, if we're spending that kind of money there, we don't have it to spend on maintaining our own defences, and it's an important consequence.
It's not just military threats. So when I look at this list, there's a whole kind of host of things. So you've got
pandemics.
You've got potential cyber attacks, food supply contamination, wildfires. That's in there. Storm damage, severe space weather, volcanic eruptions, and then societal as well. Public disorder, industrial action. They are listed as well as threats that could risk life in the UK as we know it.
Yeah, and the important thing to remember about that is that whilst we, in the modern age, on the one hand, as Peter has been rightly setting out, underspend on our military, we also seem to think our military is the answer to almost everything. If you've got a problem in the immigration system, send in the troops. If you've got a shortage of firefighters because they're out on strike, send in the troops and so forth. So actually, I unfashionably don't think the military is the answer to everything, and I certainly don't think that the military is the answer to urban unrest and to
no, heaven forfend that we have to do that. That's the very third world.
Exactly. The army is for fighting in the end, and if you send the army onto the streets, it will do what it does. It is not a civil law enforcement
Why not? Because some would say that actually when you look at the streets and the disorder that's going on, some would argue that the police are more bothered about policing pronouns and hate speech on Twitter than...
Well, then reform the police, Michelle. You can't bring the army in because of that. It's been the tradition of this country, and one of the things which distinguished it from all the other great empires. This was a naval power, not a military power, which is why we never developed the huge domestic land army to overawe the population, which you would have found in Germany,
correct,
and Russia and countries of that kind. We've never had it, and it's always been any politician who even dreams of using the military in politics or industrial relations is quite rightly becomes very unpopular because people see it goes beyond what we should be doing, and it's a misuse of an army.
It's an inappropriate
use. Pay for to defend the country.
Inappropriate use of state power.
Yeah.
But the problem...
I bet there's a lot of my viewers would completely disagree. They were shouting at you.
Well, hang on,
then let them.
They might well agree with you in setting out what you think the problems are with our current police force, and I would agree a great deal with what you said. But the answer to that is to fix the police, not to send in the army.
Yeah, but then is that doable? And
yes, it is doable. It's completely doable, and it would take a sensible government probably 4 or 5 years to do it. What you do, and I've been urging it for some time, is you set up new police forces in every location, proper local police forces of the kind they have in the United States and as we used to have here, not the vast amalgamated blobs which we have now. You train them in what police are supposed to do, which is preventive foot patrols, to raise the levels of contentment with and safety among the population and to deter crime. And when they're ready, you disband the existing failed police forces and send them home. It wouldn't take long, it would be effective, it would work, and anybody who had any serious interest in the welfare of this country would be planning it now.
I see solutions short of going that far that may well work. We've seen a couple of... policemen come in and out of fashion, don't they? They tend to be talked about as the copper's copper and then something goes wrong. But the current police chief constables in fashion have done things like insisting that every burglary has a in-person response, not just issued a crime number, stop policing speech on Twitter and get out into your communities more. These things work.
But honestly, Alex, this is a complete misconception of what the policing is about. Policing is not about... Every arrest is a failure. The investigation of crime is a failure. You cannot unburgle someone who's been burgled. You cannot unstab someone who's been stabbed. You cannot unmug someone who's been mugged. The police are there to prevent these things from happening in the first place. Yep. To do that, they have to be visibly present on the streets. If they were, then the amount of investigation they had to do would be hugely diminished.
They should still try and solve crime once they've happened.
Well, sure, but it's a very secondary...
Solving crime is secondary for the police.
Totally secondary. The key purpose of the police is the prevention of crime. That's what Robert Peel said.
One of the main deterrents of criminals is the belief that they'll get caught.
Well, it's one, but if you're not present on the streets, then they won't get caught.
Philip, one of my viewers, poses a question, and I wish that I'd seen it earlier on in the conversation because I would have passed it to the panel for discussion. But he says the way to fix most of societal ills and perhaps to prevent the crimes that we've just been discussing about is national service. He says you could bolster the armed forces, you'd stop a lot of crime on the streets, and you'd help the police out if you did that. We've just been talking about where and when the military should be used. There's some people that would say that actually, why aren't the military being used when it comes to policing the border across the English Channel, which leads me nicely to my next topic. 5 years now, that is what a leaked memo says that we're planning when it comes to housing migrants. So this isn't a short-term issue, it would seem. Is it the new normal? And if so, what do you think to that?
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nah, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Hello there, I'm Michelle Dewberry with you till 7 o'clock. Alongside me, the columnist for the Mail on Sunday, Peter Hitchens, and the PR consultant, Alex Dean. Mike on Twitter says, finally, in capital letters, Peter Hitchens has just outlined how the police can be reformed. He has exactly the right idea to completely reform the police. Someone else on Twitter is saying, why can we not use the army in the meantime while we do Peter's idea of basically recruiting a whole new set of policing? Someone else on Twitter says, the army on the streets of Britain? Goodness gracious me, absolutely not. Someone else points out the trouble with trying to retain people in the armed forces. When you see the way that we treat many of our veterans, I don't really blame people actually for second thinking about whether or not they would want to join the armed forces in the first place. We were talking about where the army could potentially be of use. I was suggesting that maybe they could help get involved with policing the border of the Channel, because we've had about 17,000 migrants cross the Channel, haven't we? Over 100,000, by the way, was the milestone that was passed since, I think, 2018. Of course, you've seen the sad loss of life at the weekend. Peter, there was a leaked memo about the potential placement of these people, which referenced time spans as long as 5 years in some cases, which gives the impression that this is not going away anytime soon. The government clearly don't think it is. So have we just got to get used to this?
Well, it would be wise for them to plan, wouldn't it? Because they have so far failed so completely to get any sort of grip on it. The real problem is that the Channel used to be partly a physical and partly a psychological barrier. People didn't think you could cross it. And then they discovered that they could. And it turned out to be extraordinarily easy, provided the weather was good. And so there is now this enormous difficulty. My view on this has been for a long time, if you want to stop it. I mean, it's not by any means the only migration problem this country has. Legal migration into this country is huge, and on a scale which I think is
606,000 net migration.
Is not being carefully thought about by those who have to provide the resources and the places to live and the schools and the hospitals for the vastly increased population we're rapidly getting. But leave that aside for a moment. The only real solution to the problem, as indeed it would be to the similar problem of crossing the Mediterranean, is to stop people from getting into the boats in the first place. And for this, we have to rely on France. And I think we have not tried sufficiently or negotiated hard enough with the French about the job which they have to do, in my view, of preventing these people from getting into the boats in the first place. No one can stop it entirely, but the one actual force which can seriously restrain it is the French state. And if we can get the French state on our side, and it would be very, very costly to do so, and I don't doubt that, then we can make an impact on it. But otherwise, I don't think it's going to change.
No, I definitely don't think it's going to change, and my viewers certainly would agree with that. But Alex, you know, even at the weekend, you saw the very sad, situation where people were in the Channel drowning, very close actually to the French shore. But yet, even despite that, those people were then brought over into Dover. So it seems that the will of the French is lacking, to put it mildly.
Yeah, there are 2 points that I've seen disputed in the most recent incidents. The first is how close they were to the French shore, but I've never seen any suggestion they were close to the UK. They were clearly much closer to France than they were to here. And the second is whether the broader French policy is effectively to escort boats once they're in the water to the UK, rather than seeking to turn them back. Supposedly the French have this policy that once the boat's underway, it would be too much of a danger to try and turn the boat around, and therefore the safest thing to do is effectively act as a ferrying service, or at least a chaperoning service to these shores. And there's disputes about both of those things. But what has basically convinced me about this point that Peter has made, that the biggest onus is on the French and what they do, is the argument that's been made by Tim Lawton MP, because he's made the point this week in the debates about this, that when the French police seek to stop those coming to the United Kingdom unlawfully, they only act in the time between getting on a boat and that boat setting off. And if they've stopped them, they just release them back into the wild. They just let them back to roam in the bushes and the dunes until they can try again. Now, someone found in this country without a lawful reason or right to be here will, in some way or other, and we can debate how sympathetically and how they get treated and where they stay and so forth, but someone in that situation in the United Kingdom is dealt with in one way or another by the authorities. The French system is effectively catch and release. The French system is, unless they are actually in the water, at which point you're going to bring them back and they're about to set out into the water, but they haven't actually gone past your knees, then you can stop their boat and bring them back. But then they let them go. So the responsibility is almost entirely on the French, because we would not do that at all in this country. We'd seek to deal with them.
I think you're being overly fair to our own authorities. It seems to me that when a lot of people, when they arrive here, they may encounter the authorities, but they're pretty much left to their own devices in many cases. And all the figures that we have for people coming ashore are of those who have actually encountered the authorities. We don't know.
At least our policy is to try. It seems that the official French policy is, once apprehended, to simply release again.
I'm not praising the behaviour of the forces of law of either nation in this particularly, but I don't think that we have much on the French in this myself. Once people have arrived in this country, they tend to stay.
Let me ask you very quickly, the ECHR, this we go around in this circle all the time. Whenever there's an issue, whenever there's a big crossing day, this concept of leaving the ECHR always comes up. Would you support that or not?
I don't think it'll make any difference. I think that the problem is that if particularly the EU countries, which includes, of course, France, would take the view that if we pulled out of the ECHR, they would then pull out of other quite important trading and other agreements with us. They would punish us very, very heavily economically for doing so. It wouldn't be a cost-free event, and I think that's why government's afraid of doing it. Whenever you know when the Tories are in real trouble, they start talking about getting out of the ECHR. But I don't think they mean it would be. It's all very well saying, well, the Canadians don't have an ECHR. They do have their own homegrown Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which has many bad effects on Canada. But the fact is, we have got the ECHR. We have not merely signed it, but we've enshrined it under the Blair government in our own law, and we're stuck with it. And people don't realise just how little freedom of action modern governments have in such matters, and how much we can be punished for breaking away from this. So I doubt very much, A, whether anything will happen, or B, if it did, that it would work. The problem that we have to face is, I say, we have to control our own immigration by deciding that that's what we want to do, with all the political consequences, with matters that we're sovereign over. And over the crossing of the Channel by migrants, we have to get the French, and I say it will cost a great deal, and it will need a great deal of very tough diplomacy. We have to get the French to stop them leaving shores of France in the first place.
Where are you on that ECHR thing?
The notion that somebody can cross many safe nations in order to cherry-pick where they wish to apply for asylum or refugee status is currently true under international law, and in my view it makes an absolute mockery of international law and current interpretations of human rights. I'd leave the ECHR.
But what about the unintended consequences that other people might highlight? So you're hearing there about potential tamperings with trade relations and all the rest of it. What about that?
The other countries are entitled to seek to respond as they wish. They can have tantrums if they wish. But you were asking us whether or not intellectually and philosophically the right thing to do would be to continue to cleave to that organisation or not.
We're not talking about tantrums. We're saying here there are actually in agreements which we've signed. We have pledged to remain within the ECHR. The ECHR, you know better than most how much I despise the surrender we made in Northern Ireland, but the ECHR is pretty much embodied in the agreements we have there.
People raise that about the Good Friday.
No one has to have a tantrum. All they need to do is say, you said you'd do this in return for this, you haven't done it, so we will now hamper trade and other relations with you in response to what you've done. We are not. The problem with this country, ever since the 1970s, is that it has given away so much of its sovereignty, and people don't realise how little room for manoeuvre a British government has in these matters. I would wish it were otherwise. But if people want to take those routes, they have to understand that they have hard consequences, which they may find harder to deal with than they expect. I don't like it. I'm not advocating it. I'm just saying this is what we face.
There are prices to bear for being a sovereign country. Proper defence and control of one's borders is part of being a sovereign country. If there are prices to bear, they are to be borne.
Well, there you go. And I'll tell you something that absolutely does impact the amount of channel crossings. It is the weather.
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hi there, it's Aidan McGibbon here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. Rain today, clearing overnight, a few showers following, but many places will be fine during Tuesday as low pressure moves into the North Sea, taking its weather fronts with it. However, one occluded feature is just providing some additional rainfall to the northeast of England through the night, some damp weather continuing here. Eventually it becomes light to moderate rain. Showers across western areas, drier towards the southeast with some clear spells, but wherever you are, it's not going to be a cold night. It's 12 to 14 Celsius generally. And it will be a bright start to Tuesday, certainly across southern areas compared with Monday. Plenty of sunshine around. Still the remnants of the cloud and rain clearing from the northeast of England, southeast Scotland first thing, but by mid-morning that's all gone. And then the showers in the west tend to transfer eastwards through the day. The heaviest downpours will be across the central belt and the southern uplands, but elsewhere actually the showers becoming more scattered into the afternoon. A better chance of some sunshine in the south and with light winds feeling much more pleasant. Then we start off Wednesday with a few fog patches in the south and the west, a lot of cloud for Scotland and northeast England, and further showers develop, but mostly showers will be in the north, especially for Scotland, drier towards the south, and this drying up trend continues into Thursday and the start of Friday with rising temperatures.
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Well, there you go. Look, if I had £1 for everyone that's emailed in on that first topic in terms of defending our country and suggested national service, I would be a very rich individual. But Di has been in touch saying, I'm an ex-soldier of many years' service, and I have to say this to anyone who's calling for national service. It is a terrible idea. Yes. You say there's enough of a problem as it stands, getting people who volunteered to even pass their fitness tests and all the rest of it, let alone adding a demotivated, uninterested cohort of young men and women. He says most of the people that call for national service are either in their 60s, so they're too young to have even done it, or they're too old to be included, so that it never actually hit their way anyway. He says, let me give your viewers this little adage. He says, 1 volunteer is worth 10 pressed men. So, in summary, no to national service. I'll leave you to ponder that. Do you have a dog? Oh, well, there you go. You've got agreement from Peter. Do you have a dog? Is it a dangerous dog? Who decides what's dangerous and what isn't? And when a dog does attack, who is responsible?
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Dewbs & Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not
believe in prisons?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard.
We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think. Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in their home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Hello there, I'm Michelle Dewberry till 7 o'clock, columnist for The Mail on Sunday. Peter Hitchens alongside me, as is the PR consultant Alex Dean. Ken says, perhaps you can ask your guests this question, Michelle. This is all back to that conversation we've just been having about migrants, the crossings of the Channel, and do we just need to accept it as the new norm? Talking about whether or not we can get France to actually step up and do their job, which is to try and stop these crossings. Ken says, can you ask your panel, why can't we, the UK, look at leveraging, restricting and suspending the French fishing licences if the French don't play ball and stop what they're supposed to be, which is the crossings?
Well, it might be an approach. I don't know. The general response to the French, if you try and get tough with them, is to get tough back. And that kind of pressure might not work. I don't know. I wouldn't rule anything out in getting this done, but I would prefer a different form of negotiation to that one if I wanted to get results. I know one of the things I admire the French for is they stand up for themselves as a country in a way which we ought to. And if you push them around, the chances are they'll push back. I doubt that would work.
They also turn a blind eye to suit their own interests, because it's plain they're letting people wander around the north coast of France on the basis they'll go somewhere else and be someone else's problem.
Well, yeah, that's what I think. Why would? Yes, OK, as long as the French take these millions of pounds, why would they try and stop them?
The fundamental problem here, Michelle, is actually goes back to David Cameron and his stupid war in Libya, which actually opened up the Mediterranean, which previously was not a huge crossing point for migrants, and changed Europe forever.
There you go. It's changed Europe forever. Ken, not much buy-in there for your suggestion. I think it sounds like quite a good one. What could be the worst that could happen if we were indeed to propose that? I don't know. You tell me. Now, let's talk dogs, shall we? Because parents of a 3-month-old little girl, she was killed, basically. She was in her pram by one of her parents' dogs. They've got, I think it's 16 or 19 husky dogs. Anyway, long story short, these people now, the owners of this dog, have been spared jail today. Also in the news, there was a really horrible picture of a little 5-year-old girl, Alex, that's had her cheek kind of ripped off by a dog. Dog attacks are on the rise in this country. What do we do about it? Who's responsible?
It's almost axiomatic in politics that dog legislation has been most of the significant examples of bad legislation passed in a hurry. And it happened in the dog days, no pun intended, of the last Tory government, when there was a long, hot summer and a spate of attacks like this. And it produced legislation we've spent a generation wrestling with and seeking to disentangle. I love dogs and I declare that interest, although I don't have one now because I think it'd be irresponsible to have one whilst living in London and not able to exercise it enough. This couple had 19 dogs. Big dogs, and
this is them on the screen now.
It's very difficult to imagine exercising them adequately. One never wishes to second-guess a judge or a jury, because I wasn't there to hear the evidence and I didn't hear the accounts that were given. And I am sure these parents meant no harm to their child, and it's a tragic incident.
This is just so you know what I'm showing on the screen while you're talking, Alex. Sorry to cut in, but this is the van. So this family, they had multiple, what we're saying, 19 husky dogs. So what they used to do, this is their van, they used to take these dogs out racing, basically, and what happened was they didn't put the dogs in the cages that you've just seen at the back of the van. They jumped over the front seat and attacked the little girl while she was at the side. So that's the cages and that's the sledge thing, whatever it is.
Correct. And it seems to me that plainly that was something terribly negligent in that, and that's the facts speak for themselves. It resulted in the death of this poor, blameless infant. So whilst I don't second-guess the judge and the determination that they made, it seems to me the fault here lies with the owners.
And the RSPCA, they want to extend the dangerous dog breeds list, Peter. They want to have dog licences to be reintroduced like they do in Northern Ireland, and they want a national database of all the dogs, the breeds, their behaviours, etc. What would you say?
Well, maybe. I mean, they would have thought about it more than I have, and maybe these things will work. But I think that the difficulty here is that we all look and we see a child killed or horribly wounded by a dog, and we feel so grieved and angry that we think anything must be good, something must be done, this is something, let's do it. I'm not rejecting any idea, particularly that an expert organisation, RSPCA, might have, but I think a lot of the problem lies not in particular tragic cases like the one of the parents who kept all these dogs, which we were just discussing, but the presence in large parts of the country of people who deliberately own dogs, which they choose because of their aggressive nature and the danger with them. And I think this is all part of the absence of power in the hands of authority in our country and the growing power of the lawless. And I think that's the real problem which many people face. You live in an area where there are people like that, with dogs like that, you're afraid of it. And that goes back to something we were discussing earlier. This country needs to be properly policed, and people of that kind need to be curbed by the constant presence of lawful power and authority in the streets, which we don't have at the moment. But I'd say I'm not going to argue with the RSPCA. They know about this much more than I do. But as Alex rightly said, the 1991 Dangerous Dogs Act has been a big problem ever since.
It's been a disaster. There is a problem here, maybe too complicated to get into, but it seems to me, on the one hand, it's a very brave minister who looks at this set of facts and turns on the breakfast TV couch presented with the death of these poor children and says, well, one must maintain a sense of proportion and these things don't happen that often. The fact it's happened a couple of times shouldn't prompt knee-jerk legislation. What the audience wants them to say is something will be done and I'm going to do it. Then, a few months or a year or two later, when the minister has banned certain breeds or certain characteristics and people having their dogs put down, the same people will say this is madness.
Well, do you know, I will never forget, ever, until my dying days, my brush with death. I can tell you I was nearly attacked by a pack of dogs. I will never forget it as long as I live. It was in Vietnam. I was on my own in a
I was
national park.
chased by a pack of dogs in Detroit.
I'm telling you.
I've never run so fast in my life, especially given I was 60 at the time. It was an amazing sight, but we made it to the car. And I was trapped once also in a shed by a savage Alsatian. I had to stay there for several hours until the owner turned up and rescued me. So I'm not neutral on this.
Made it to Dewbs and Kerr.
Dogs can be dangerous.
They can, and many people will be shouting at the screen saying they can also be lovable and a member of the family too. Look, I can tell you an absolutely bonkers story up next. Working in healthcare, the NHS, for example, should you be compelled to use the pronouns that people ask you to? And if you don't, should you face the risk of prosecution? What's going on?
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dewbs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
delicious?
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
all sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello there, I'm Michelle Dewberry. Till 7 o'clock, Peter Hitchens, Alex Dean alongside. We've just been talking about dangerous dogs. Susan on Twitter says, Michelle, you've got a lot of negative stories about dogs, but what about all the great stories too? What about guide dogs, for example? Hospitals use dogs to sniff out serious diseases. Dogs help autistic people, disabled children, and they give so much joy and they open up their lives. Therapy dogs, she says, are incredible. Barry says, when it comes to dangerous dogs, owners, he says, are always to blame. Now, let's speak to hospitals, shall we? Because apparently some hospitals have threatened employees with disciplinary action if they have the audacity, everyone, wait for it, to use the wrong pronouns. I have to say, I find this absolutely absurd. As a medical professional, you just want to help somebody as best you can. And all these layers of ridiculousness, I don't even know where they're coming from.
So it's completely absurd per se, but just to add to the... So that's the first principle. But to add to the absurdity, the articles we've been looking at make it very clear. It's not just he or she, different way round.
No.
It's ze, they, koi, a, here... I mean, how are you supposed to remember the pretended made-up identity that's been adopted, let alone use it? Look, if a big chap with a beard asked me to call him Susan, I very well might, because I am polite. But he has no right to compel me to believe something opposite to that which I believe.
But would you call this bloke she?
Well, I might choose to, but the state has no right to compel me to, nor does my employer.
Do you agree with that?
I do, actually. I think it's perfectly reasonable if people feel this strongly. It's not my business to know the inside of their souls or minds. If that's what they ask us to do, then it's only polite to do it. But to be compelled to do it, so to be either under the threat of law or under the threat of loss of employment, seems to me to be something quite different. And all these things happening, what they tell me is that the revolution has already happened in this country, that the sensible people long ago lost power and authority, and we're now actually under the control of a completely different regime from the one that we think is running us. But no, I think compulsion is absurd.
I disagree on that last point. I actually think we've gone past peak trans. I think if you see the efforts of sporting bodies to keep men out of women's sports where their competition is dangerous, that's where it began in things like contact sports, but it's now extending to things like swimming and so forth, which is not to do with contact sports, just to do with blatant unfairness of a man defining as a woman and then breaking records. I actually think we've gone past the extreme point, and we can come back to restoring common sense.
Well, we'll come back and talk about it in 5 years' time, shall we? Because what I remember is that an awful lot of things which particularly the media used to laugh at as political correctness gone mad, so that's an irritating phrase, 10, 15 years ago, have now become normal. And indeed, the very media which mocked them have now adopted them, and I see this as an ineluctable process which carries on and on. So let's see in 5 years' time whether you're right. I mean, I'd be glad if you were, but I'm not at all sure that you will be.
And was it today that there's talk now about, new buildings, public buildings and spaces, you've got to have single-sex toilets?
Good for the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman. This is another example. Suella Braverman said, if you're building a new building, it has to have single-sex toilets. Not enough of this unisex position, or omnisex, where men can go into women's spaces.
It's come to something, hasn't it, when the Secretary of State for the Home Department has to legislate about what kind of lavatories are...
But has legislated in what you and I think is the right way.
Well, I don't know.
I can't help but notice it mainly seems to be men trying to get into women's spaces. I don't really think there's a great deal of women desperate to get into the men's toilets or the men's changing room. I do feel like, as a woman, I do feel like I am the one that has to absorb all this absolute lunacy. So I've got to be referred to as a cis woman in order to accommodate men pretending to be women. I've now got to go to a gender-neutral toilet.
The term cis woman is ridiculous. You're just a woman. Adult human female is a woman. And my other view, you make of the point that you rightly make about it mostly being men trying to get into women's spaces what you will. But But I will say that women in one stage or another in human society since the dawn of time have been treated as less than. And I'm not pretending everything's been fine, but just as we get within glimpsing distance of equality, here comes a new clutch of men who get to say, I'm going to define as a woman, then I can enjoy all the rights, privileges and protections that come with being a woman, and pretend you've got to pretend that I've had the experience of growing up as a woman as well. That sounds a great deal like the patriarchy to me.
Yeah, but it's been people are indulging it, and if I had £1 for every time I hear "can a woman have a penis," again, I'd be very rich.
Obviously
I never
not.
seem to hear it the opposite way. I never seem to hear "can a man have a vagina?" That question is never asked. It is always, if you ask me, the woman that is expected to compromise and have hair spaces restricted and shared to accommodate guys. It annoys me, I have to be honest. Let me just have a quick look though to see what you guys have got to say on that. Lots of conversations about the toilets, people agreeing with single-sex toilets. Well done, you sensible individuals. Kathy and lots of you actually saying that they really appreciate the panel tonight, like the conversation that you've been having. Lots of conversations about the dogs. Again, the sentiment coming through that actually it is the owners and not the dogs. When it comes to pronouns, again, people are saying yes out of respect, but when you compel me to call people, it's not going to happen. But I'll tell you what I'm compelled to do, say thank you and good night.
Thank you very much.
Time flies. Thank you. And thank you at home for your company too. Do not go anywhere. Nigel Farage is up next.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hi there, it's Aidan McGibbon here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. Rain today, clearing overnight, a few showers following, but many places will be fine during Tuesday as low pressure moves into the North Sea, taking its weather fronts with it. However, one occluded feature is just providing some additional rainfall to the northeast of England through the night, some damp weather continuing here. Eventually it becomes light to moderate rain. Showers across western areas, drier towards the southeast with some clear spells, but wherever you are, it's not going to be a cold night. It's 12 to 14 Celsius generally. And it will be a bright start to Tuesday, certainly across southern areas compared with Monday. Plenty of sunshine around. Still the remnants of the cloud and rain clearing from the northeast of England, southeast Scotland first thing, but by mid-morning that's all gone. And then the showers in the west tend to transfer eastwards through the day. The heaviest downpours will be across the central belt and the southern uplands, but elsewhere actually the showers becoming more scattered into the afternoon. A better chance of some sunshine in the south and with light winds feeling much more pleasant. Then we start off Wednesday with a few fog patches in the south and the west, a lot of cloud for Scotland and northeast England, and further showers develop, but most of these showers will be in the north, especially for Scotland, drier towards the south, and this drying up trend continues into Thursday and the start of Friday with rising temperatures.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.